have an opening question to start with, and then we'll dive into a little bit of a craft topic. As Alida said at the top, anytime anyone has a question or comment, wants to join the conversation, drop it in chat. We'd love to hear from you. So my opening question today is, what is one aspect of storycraft that you personally have struggled with, and how have you either worked on it or overcome it?
Me? Struggle? Oh man. What have I struggled with? And when? How long ago?
Threw
Watch
you a
me draw
stumper.
a blank. I know that's a little embarrassing, isn't it? What do I struggle with? I can tell you currently, which maybe isn't quite the question you were asking for.
Open to
Uh,
interpretation.
okay, good. Good. Yeah, so my current work in progress, as many people have heard, is omniscient. And so I find it interesting when I'm going into a non-primary character's point of view, when I'm dipping in because I want to reveal something specific in just this scene. It's very short-term point of view, really, a little bit of their perspective lens, but more narrative exposition, but in their point of view. And so sometimes the character just clicks and I know what they sound like and I know how to describe them, right? And that's easy, but often I don't. So I know from my technical vantage point as author why I want to use this point of view, what I want to expose about the story, about the world, about history through this momentary point of view. But then I find I'm not connecting with the character as person. So if there's a takeaway for other people here, I think it's highlighting that when we're going to put a character on the page for the reader and they aren't just an extra walking through a scene, when they're actually serving a function in the story and in our protagonist's life, we still have to find that connection. We still have to find the specific details that make them memorable, even if they're ultimately kind of a disposable character, you know? So
Hmm.
I think that's interesting. That's something I was thinking about this morning when I was in a couple of points of view that are rather transient in the story.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
what else?
No, that's great. Yeah, giving them their full due, even though they're minor. That's good. Okay.
Yeah, I
Anyone
feel
have?
like I didn't really give you a good answer to your question.
No, that's great. Well, I think it's important, even with all of your experience, there's still things that you will sit with and will say, okay, this, I need to focus more on this, or I need to work on this, because we're always learning and growing, right? And we're always discovering things or stretching our craft. And you've talked about that before, about giving yourself a challenge. And this is your challenge of the moment, is using this omniscient
hmm
POV. So,
Yeah, yeah, and I think, when we come up upon craft challenges in our writing, we work through them, we move past them, but we're doing it in the context of a specific writing project. So that doesn't mean we aren't going to come up against that challenge in the next project, right? But because we've solved it once, we can solve it again. We've got a history with that challenge, but it's going to look different. It's going to take a different shape. At least I hope it is, because I like writing that's always expanding me as an author. If I could just sort of like drop something in and keep moving, I would get tired of writing. I would find that
oh, yeah,
tedious ultimately.
definitely. All right. I like that answer. Okay, so I'm going to drop into our topic for today. But again, if anyone has any questions that you brought, or comments, feel free to drop them in chat and we will get to them as quickly as I see them, which hopefully is quickly. Okay, so we recorded an episode of Storyworks where we touched on setting this week. And as part of that conversation, it got me thinking about things that I would love to ask Alida during this time. So we're going to talk a little bit about hopefully crafting what I'm calling memorable settings. Um, I have had the privilege of reading Skog Hall series as well as a Stone's Throw from Alida. So I'm going to reference some of your settings and kind of use those as touchstones for moving forward with this conversation. So, in your books, you have created some pretty memorable settings and used settings as kind of centerpieces. I'm thinking of the house in Skog Hall, or in A Stone's Throw, I think it's the Women's Center with the mural, right? Where we're kind of, those are key moments. Do you think that all stories kind of have a central setting, or if that is that a necessary piece to build into a story, or is that something that only certain stories need?
Hmm, that's a really good question. My immediate answer is yes. I think we do need setting to be specific, to be real, to be more than a backdrop to our characters' movements through a scene, And you're referencing, excuse me, very specific places within
Hmm.
the novels. And so those particular examples are the places I developed especially well, right? Because they're
Hmm.
serving a role in the story as more than physical location.
Correct.
They're
Yeah.
places where key moments in the story happens where I really want the reader to be able to track my character's movements through the world without me dropping into like nitty gritty exposition. So you're in that place multiple times, many times over the course of the story. And so each time you're there, your familiarity with it grows so that, when these major things are happening, you just feel like you're in that place and you know it and you can see it without a lot of explanation so that I can focus on the character and the action instead of
Hmm.
on the setting, the environment the action is in. And I think if a writer tries to write a story without one or two of those key locations, then you're going to find yourself needing to do more of that world building or leaving the reader in kind of an abstract story where your sense of place is minimal, where you're leaving it up to the reader to fill in blanks, where you just reference something. I've had writers show me scenes where the action is happening in a kitchen or something. They say, well, the kitchen that I see in my head might not look anything like the kitchen you see your characters moving through, right? And do you really want to leave all of that up to the reader's imagination? And we don't need everything, right? We don't need the
Right.
kitchen sink, ha ha ha, but we need enough detail, enough description to ground the reader in that environment so that things aren't just sort of popping out of thin air or, left
Hmm.
to random devices. And then it's
Yeah.
as with character development, you can kind of think of your settings in stratas or tiers. Like, where is
Hmm.
important action happening? Where are we just moving through? So sometimes you can use a broad brush stroke. Sometimes you need to really get in there, and do the fine detail work.
Yeah, that makes sense. I read a book very recently that was interesting with setting in this situation where they were moving the whole way, like the whole book was a journey, but I felt like the author did a very good job of creating kind of their camp as their keystone setting, right? Where it's like we knew, which tent was where and what the tents looked like and who was next to whom. So I feel like having that was in there, but it was in there in a different way, right? Where you're crafting something for the reader to hold on to even as you're moving through different landscapes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I feel like having that centering was important, but it was different. It was done differently than having like you have the house or like I have an apartment in my story that's very central that she keeps coming back to. So, yeah,
Hmm.
interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the key is not leaving the reader with, I call it green screen writing, where we feel like our characters are just in front of a big blank backdrop. And if you do have that kind of travel, you might think more about props. Like, what is my
Mm,
character bringing with her through these changes of environment that then gives us a sense of connection or belonging or importance, right?
mm-hmm.
I mean, we do so much with our setting. If you think of your character's primary space, let's say it's a bedroom, how does she, or her apartment, how does she decorate it? What does it look like? Something that's very, ultra modern, black and white, sleek is going to be different than something with a bunch of boho blankets and, floral curtains. And that communicates details to the reader. So then if we put her on a train, right, what is in her bag? What is on her body? What is meaningful to us? Or, going back to like the women's center you mentioned in a stone's throw, what that building is intended to be and what my protagonist is doing there with painting the mural carries a lot of thematic weight in addition to the fact that key action happens in that setting.
Right. Yeah. And that I had that as one of my questions here about if all stories need one or a few maybe central settings to hang on, how do you choose with, how you have your setting be central to the story's theme or plot, whether you said you've got like central actions that are happening there, but also thematic weight. So how did you develop that in concert with the theme and with the plot?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a chicken or an egg
For
question,
sure.
right? I mean, I think if you know what your story is about, then these things are going to present themselves to you as you're developing your story. So I knew that Simone is an artist. I knew that women she's painting were going to come to life and interact with her. And so I decided, well, I want them to be life size, not like they're, on a canvas and then step out and blow up or they're miniature or something. So it had to be a mural. So for a mural, you need a big wall. And this is a story all about women's relationships and mothers and daughters and questions of motherhood and such. And so it makes sense for it to be a women's center. And then, it's set in Minneapolis and I like historic buildings. So I was thinking about what kind of building would she get to paint this mural in? And so I went with a fictional version of a grain exchange building. So very masculine industry. And after it was a
Mhm.
grain exchange, it was a bank. And then, when the story opens, it's vacant and it's been um, purchased through grants and public funds and such to become a women's resource center. So then I'm just combining like what I know about the sister city and our history and such with the thematic elements of my story, along with what I need for my character to do, which is paint life-size women who come to life. Right? So that I just kind of walked you through the journey of creating that setting because it isn't, I mean, I guess it could be a one and done, right? But we
Well,
we
yeah.
make our choices based on the story we want to tell, the needs of our story, the needs of our protagonist. Um,
Well, and I
yeah.
think that's important to walk through because it's so easy to just be like, "Oh, I just picked this spot because she needed dot, dot, dot." And it's like realistically, it was more there were more factors involved, right? And I think, um, I did a similar thing with my protagonist in her apartment, like, what does she need character-wise in order to be able to live in this world? So, that's
Hmm.
that's cool, walking through that
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Let's say hi to Kristen. and Anna. And of course, if you have questions or comments, throw them in the chat.
Yeah, we're talking about crafting memorable settings, but of course, you can talk about whatever you would like. Okay. What level of detail, or maybe even I was thinking like repetition of detail, do you use in order to create cement a setting into a reader's mind? Like you talked about familiarity and creating a familiarity where the reader can feel themselves in that space. What kind of details or, like I said, repetition do you use?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, it depends a bit on the location and how it's functioning in the story, So for the Women's Resource Center, the first time it appears on the page, Simona's friend, Hannah, was on the, who's connected to it, right? Who's got keys, takes her to the center to let her know, to announce that you got the job. You were commissioned to paint this mural. And so we're seeing it through Simona's lens. It's being introduced to her at the same time it's being introduced to the reader. So I'm able to put in that sense of wow and newness and really taking it all in. Like, where's the wall I'm going to paint? What's this thing over here? What's the history of the building? The big front doors have like, I don't know if they're bronze or whatever. I made them like sheaves of wheat as these decorative door handles as a nod to history and such. And I did a similar thing in a stone in Murder in Skog Hall because it's a haunted house, but Jess, my protagonist, has just bought it, so she's moving into it. So there's kind of that walk through it new thing. With Simona's apartment, it's much more casual. Like she comes in, she puts the coat up. It's a loft. There's a sliding, kind of industrial door. So you get the lay of the land as she inhabits it instead of that
Hmm.
kind of touristy, ooh, let's check it out. What's over here? What's over there? Experience. And then as for repetition, I think you want to avoid being too on the nose about things, and if I think way back to the first draft of Murder in Skog Hall, I think I was a little bit on the nose in my narrative because I was writing it for myself as well. I'm looking at the floor
Hmm.
plan of the old house I found and I'm thinking, okay, you move here and the pantry connects the dining room and the kitchen and the flow of movement is this way, and then I revised down for that because I wanted the reader to know the house, right? So when things are happening, I don't have to explain the mechanics of it.
Hmm.
But, I also had to be aware of like, oh, too much. Take the narrative back. Don't describe every little detail. And then you let repetition occur naturally, right? So if your character is in the living room and the fireplace is over there between two windows, you can use the action, you can use the character's gaze when she looks out the window, you can use whatever you need to do to just have it occur organically, right? If you think you might be writing on the nose and overdoing it, you probably are.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Kristen has a comment here. She says, I recently experimented with a short story about a locomotive engineer going through an emotional upheaval set in the channeled scablands of Western Washington. That worked pretty well, though maybe too obvious.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I can't picture the setting. So, you can give us more info.
Ah.
Hmm. But if we were to riff on the idea of too obvious, I think again, you kind of know, right? Like what would be too obvious? I don't know. I mean, setting
I,
sets mood. It
yeah.
does give us a lot of great material for metaphors. If you want someone to feel closed in, you're going to put them in a dense forest, not out on the plains, right? Where you can see the horizon like forever,
Hmm.
kind of a thing. Um, yeah, I don't know. It sounds like a cool landscape. I still don't know
I think
how to comment on the question.
yeah. Like how you said, if we're talking about memorable settings, I feel like if you describe that well, that would be a very memorable setting and something that would be striking in contrast to the train going across it. So that's
Hmm.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it is definitely a balance.
Hmm. All
Yeah,
right.
and
So
I
you
think
mentioned,
too,
oh, go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say it reminds me that we also need to keep in mind our readers, so Kristen is mentioning a place that I've never heard of, so I can't picture it. So the only sense of it I would have is based on what's ever on the page. Um, in my critique group recently, a writer gave us a nonfiction piece, an essay in which, as a kid, he was playing on the ice with a friend and he fell through. And instead of trying to get back up out of the ice, he went down and he walked along the bottom and walked out of it. And I'm a Minnesotan, land of 10,000 lakes. I'm like, are you kidding me? Never mind the cold. What about like the silt coming up on the bottom? You wouldn't see anything. And, if you're under ice, it's so disorienting and people don't know how to get back to the hole. And what do you like technical, concerns all over the place? And then he's like, oh, yeah. It was a quarry, so it's just a rock bottom. There's no dirt in there. And yeah, the ice wasn't totally solid, so I was walking under ice chunks. And I'm like, well, okay. Um, which is just a note for all of us to remember that the reader doesn't know what we know. And so we've got to think about readers' reasonable objections, right? Like somebody
Right.
who knows frozen lakes isn't going to except the description he had on the page at that stage of drafting. It needed more detail and more specificity so that we wouldn't be pulled out of the story.
Right. For sure. Just got a
Hmm,
recommendation. Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson. Fascinating integration of setting and plot.
nice. To look for that. I've not read that one.
Well, and I do think sometimes we discount how much setting can be affecting our plot. We just think of it as the set and not so much as a direct player, but it is definitely a large component. It can be, I should say.
Yeah, yeah. I might go so far as to say it should be,
Hmm.
you know?
I would agree. Okay, I want to have you just riff on some common problems that you see with settings in people's work and maybe some ways for them to identify and fix them.
Mm, okay. Well, the one I just mentioned with remembering that
Hmm.
the reader's not in your head. And I think we can take things for granted as being obvious when we know a setting, when it's very familiar to us, because we aren't doing any discovery as we're writing it, right? And if it's where we live or grew up, then everyone around us can take it for granted as well. And so we can forget that we're painting the picture for somebody else. Um, so awareness of the reader, and then also that idea of the green screen writing and people can kind of get caught up in the characters and the action and so what are they doing and somebody drinks coffee or goes upstairs or gets in a car or whatever and those movements just sort of happen, which that's okay when it's just a little bit here and there, but when you've got a string of movements like that, um, there comes a point where a reader's going to go, wait a minute, like where are we? Where's this happening? What does that? look like. And as a reader, I can go with it for so long, you know, maybe a third to a half of a page, and then I'm just like, whoa, bring me back into this world because I'm losing touch with it. And the characters start feeling like they're disembodied. They're kind
Hmm.
of talking heads or just there's a head and a pair of hands and something happens now and then, but I don't have a sense of physicality, you know, and we need that. Um, and setting also is a major component of our narrative exposition, right? And so you get these scenes that look more like scripts than novels or short stories because of the green screen, because of the disembodied character, and the setting falling off of the page. But then as a result, you also lose touch with your narrative voice. It just
Mm.
kind of disappears, and the writer might only pop the narrative back in when they want to go into the character's head for a thought or something. But you're leaving the reader with a very limited experience of your story when you deny the reader exposition. That is the storytelling, right? And I'm sure I've said this on the podcast. I don't know if I've said it on an Ask Alida, but when you think about narrative exposition and what it is, think of EX words like expose, explain, expand, expound upon, right? So it isn't just to describe a building or just to say somebody walked across this room. It's so much more than that. And that is the story. It is the voice, right? So don't neglect your narrative exposition, and setting is a big piece of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, I have a closing question that's a little bit more fun, but it's still about setting. So, if you if you could travel to any setting in any book that you have read, what setting would you pick and why?
Oh,
Like pick your place you would go.
dang. Um, well, I mean, The Great Gatsby, because right now I'm writing a story set in the 20s. And so to go back and to party and ride in the cars and, be on the coast and be in the city and the clothing, like that would be awesome. Um, hmm. All right, where would you go, Catherine?
Oh, see, I had to think about this because there's your like
Yeah.
pat answers. Like, I mean, I would love to visit Middle Earth, but that's like, of course, I mean, Tolkien was a master of creating a crazy world. But I kind of went with nostalgia. And if I could visit any setting, and this is totally a fake made up one, I loved the Mercedes Lackey books growing up, and she has a whole universe of like 100 books in it. And I was like, I want to go to Valdemar.
Mm,
That's where I want to go. So I think when you have lived in a setting for so long through so many books, you sort of begin to picture what it would be like to be there. And so there was a lot of nostalgia
yeah.
there for me.
Yeah. Great
So,
answer.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's funny you say nostalgia, and um I I want a time machine whenever I'm writing historical
Right?
fiction, right? So I'm like, well, of course I'd want to go back to Victorian times, and I do have a big fondness for those antiques, kind of late 19th, early 20th century and such. And you go through any city and see these beautiful homes and think, wow, God, I wonder what they were like in their heyday
Right?
when the garage out back was a stable and carriages were going under the carports and everything. Yeah, and so nostalgic reading, it would be Little House on the Prairie and Anne of Green Gables.
Yes, totally. And then you go, I
Yes.
probably wouldn't want to actually live there, but if I could visit, That would be awesome.
I I could live there as long as I wasn't poor. I mean, I would never want to be the factory worker, but
That's true, right?
if I could go back and have some money, it could be awfully fun.
Oh man, awesome. Cool.
Hmm.
Well, that wraps up my questions on settings. And see, setting is powerful. Here we just love to go and visit them. So if anyone
Yes.
has any other questions or settings that you would visit if you had the chance, we'd love to hear
Yeah,
about
what
it.
setting would you visit?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Anything again, just to bring back announcements or things Alita had talked about at the beginning, but just if you want to reiterate any of that before we close the call.
Mm, no, no announcements other than I'm working hard on big stuff. The Dunes of Michigan. Nice. Yeah, that would be cool. I've not been there. I've been to Pictured Rocks in Michigan on Lake Superior, but I've not been to the dunes. I've seen pictures. I
Awesome.
guess that's it.
Yeah,
All
so first
right.
Monday in April we'll be back. Bring your questions and look forward to seeing you
Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Catherine.
then.
Bye.